Here's one thing that wealthy parents worry about that most others don't. What happens if my children grow up in an environment where life is too easy? And ironically, that ease can become the biggest obstacle that your children may ever face. So I've seen this a bunch of times, from peers of my youth all the way to the children of the people that I know today. And the parents build wealth through pressure and uncertainty, and they develop this really strong sense of resilience. And then the children grow up in stability and comfort and abundance, and it makes it really hard to develop that same resilience. In environments where problems are consistently handled, anticipated, and solved for them, children are faced with this. Decisions carry less weight. Failure carries less consequence, and effort can become optional. Resilience doesn't develop because it's just not required. And you can't just simply gift resilience later. And I've got 3 kids. It's very natural to want to create a protective space for them. It makes total sense from like an evolutionary standpoint. You want your kids to survive, and you'll use all your resources to make that happen. And you might even be thinking, like, I don't want them to struggle like I did. But the problem is that you're not just taking away the negative aspects that life throws at you, you're also removing some positives. And it feels like good parenting, but your children may avoid difficult decisions. They may hesitate to take risks, and they might interpret small setbacks as being incredibly stressful. And the kids are basically being robbed of building that same muscle that the parents developed that made them so strong. And I think at higher levels of wealth, this risk compounds, because greater wealth generally equates to a greater ability to rid one's life of typical problems. And without these fundamental problems, there's no problem solving. Without problem solving, there are fewer opportunities for personal growth. Now, for a high net worth family, a bad decision doesn't necessarily create financial stress. A failed business doesn't eliminate all the other opportunities. And a wrong turn doesn't close doors. It just delays them. The consequences of failure have this backstop in the form of the family's resources. But the consequences of avoiding failure result in a system with no feedback. And no feedback equals slow growth. So I believe the best way to approach this situation is to deliberately design problems for children to solve, and not in a harsh or punitive or like an obviously manufactured way, but in a structured, intentional way. And here's just a few ways that I see this work. So ownership before entitlement. Instead of just granting access to what they want, you create pathways. And your children might have an opportunity, but you want the responsibility to be closely tied with it. So they might want capital for a business. Well, have them present a plan. They might want some financial support in a general sense. Have them show some discipline first. And the goal isn't to restrict, but it's to build that bridge between effort and outcome. Establishing real consequences. This can be incredibly hard for some parents. It's hard for me sometimes, but it's truly powerful when you execute it right. So even if you can fix the problem, such as like forgetting something important for school or getting an introduction to someone for your kid's benefit, you simply let them figure it out or suffer the natural consequences. You let the mistake happen. You let the discomfort set in. And as time marches on, then they start to learn how to deal with this head on their own terms, whatever that may be. Another important one is having exposure to challenge, not just instruction. So you can explain the concept of resilience, but it's not something that you learn on an intellectual level. It's experiential. And you can do this by making sure that they're exposed to environments where they or you are not the decision maker. And you can also introduce them to situations where they're evaluated objectively. So sports are a great one. Other contests certainly work. And anytime they're in a role where performance matters, they face this uninsulated reality. And this is where they have their chance to shine or improve. The last one that I like is ensuring that they have some kind of delayed ease. And what I mean by that is just because you can make something easy doesn't mean you should, at least not right away. And intentionally delaying access to certain privileges is a great way to do this at any age. It's not a punishment. It's just a very deliberate path to development. And it's also important to calibrate the amount of friction that they face. Like too little friction can lead to fragility later in life, but too much friction can lead to discouragement. So you can't always control this, but if you can design a situation where they can see improvement, it's a critical feedback signal for your children to keep moving, and overcoming those obstacles is going to create a big win for them ultimately. So all this ties into wealth management in a very important way. Families that thrive over generations don't just manage assets, they manage decision-making environments. There's structure in place to encourage responsibility and accountability, but discourage complacency. And similar to how high net worth families will have this guiding compass on how they invest their assets, I think there should be a guide to how their children grow up and experience challenge. And without a guiding force, it's just too easy to default to convenience. Resilience is such an important skill, and it doesn't come from comfort. I like to say that resourcefulness matters more than resources. And it all comes from navigating difficulty. It comes from solving problems. And let's face it, all money earning efforts are essentially derived from solving problems. Whether it's as an employee or an entrepreneur, we're all solving problems to better each other's lives. And if your child cannot participate in that world, in that framework, then they're going to fall far behind.